Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Stark, Chief Marketing and Community Relations Officer at Rollins College, and I have the privilege of welcoming you to our campus as we recognize the exceptional contributions of Dr. John Hitt to the University of Central Florida and our greater Central Florida community. A number of you may be visiting Rollins for the first time, and we are delighted to introduce you to this other smaller shining star in Central Florida's galaxy of higher education. You may not know that Rollins was the first college in Florida, or that you are sitting in a landmark building listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Rollins counts ambassadors, artists, journalists, judges, Fortune 500 CEOs, NASA scientists, and a Nobel laureate among its graduates, from Mr. Fred Rogers to the current Secretary of the U.S. Navy. Whether producing Fulbright scholars or registering students to vote, the magnitude of our students' success far exceeds our size. This evening's program will give us an opportunity to enjoy a conversation between two dynamic college presidents. And if we have time, Dr. Hitt will answer some of your questions as well. Our moderator tonight will be Rollins' 15th president, Dr. Grant Cornwell. President Cornwell is in his 11th year as a college president, a relative newcomer compared to Dr. Hitt's quarter century plus. Before coming to Rollins in 2015, Dr. Cornwell led the College of Worcester in Ohio, and prior to that spent more than 20 years at his undergraduate alma mater, St. Lawrence University in upstate New York, as a professor of philosophy, a dean, and a provost. His keen thinking about a liberal arts education in a global environment is much sought after in national and international higher education arenas. In March, President Cornwell will host 20 global university presidents at Rollins, all equally engaged in stewarding the highest quality education for global citizenship and responsible leadership. Our honored guest, Dr. John Hitt, took the reins at the University of Central Florida in 1992. John Hitt is now the longest-serving president in the state university system. He has been president of UCF over half of its life, and he has awarded more degrees than any Florida university president in history, more than 250,000 and still counting. As he looks toward a new chapter of leadership and service, UCF's enrollment has grown to more than 66,000 students, with more than 45% identifying as minorities, and a quarter the first in their families to attend college, as was Dr. Hitt himself. The quality of academic programs, faculty, and students has increased dramatically as well. In 2017, UCF achieved 16 number one rankings, and the entering class included 88 National Merit Scholars. Annual research funding has quadrupled, and more than $1 billion in new construction has produced more than 100 new buildings. Among the goals Dr. Hitt identified for UCF was being America's leading partnership university. He recognized that by combining efforts with government, business, and philanthropy, they could accomplish together what none could do alone, and with results that include new facilities and needed programs, expanded educational opportunities, new businesses and well-paying jobs, and a boost to the region's quality of life. Key among these is the UCF College of Medicine, which anchors Medical City at Lake Nona. It's no wonder that Dr. Hitt was named one of America's 10 most innovative college presidents by Washington Monthly Magazine, and has twice topped Orlando Magazine's list of Orlando's 50 most powerful people. His service to higher education and our community has been as inspiring as it has been untiring, and we are so happy to host him tonight in our neighborhood. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Rollins College President Grant Cornwell and University of Central Florida President John Hitt.
Well, good evening, friends. Good evening, John. It's very nice to have you here tonight. The format will be simple. I'll ask you some questions and we'll just have a conversation. But why don't we start this way? Rather than describing our own institutions, let's begin by offering some impressions of one another's institutions. And I'm happy to start. So I've only been here 3 years now. And when I first came to Orlando and to Winter Park and to Rollins College, I had a lot of orientation. But there was one event where I didn't have a lot of time for orientation because I no sooner wound up here that I was asked to sit on a panel for a gathering of the nation's higher education journalists. And on that panel was John Hitt, University of Central Florida, Sandy Shugart, Valencia, and Grant Cornwell, Rollins College. And it occurred to me that one of these things isn't like the others. And so I did have an orientation to the higher education landscape in Florida because I'm from the Northeast, went to a small private liberal arts college in the Northeast, and then served as a professor and dean and provost and president of a private liberal arts college then in Ohio. And I'm used to, in the Northeast and the Midwest, what it means to go to college is to go to a small private residential college. And so one of the things that drew me to Florida, and one of the things that I certainly recognized as soon as I got here, is that in Florida, what it means to go to college is to go to one of the great public institutions in Florida. And so that took some orientation. And at first, when I looked at the scale of UCF, I was impressed. I was a bit overwhelmed with the scope. And over these 3 years, as I've come to appreciate the quality of education, the quality of programs at UCF, and especially the students that you have served and continue to serve, many of whom are first-generation students, I have come to be very, very respectful and proud to be your neighbor here in Central Florida for your mission. So that's how I see UCF. How do you see Rollins?
Well, I see in Rollins a mature, high-quality liberal arts institution that has managed to keep a strong focus on the liberal arts while at the same time offering curricula that are very current in terms of I think of the Crummer School here. Mm-hmm. You can argue about whether there really ought to be a strong role for business education in a liberal arts college, mm-hmm. but there's no arguing that Rollins has, by having the Crummer School and promoting it as effectively and building its quality as effectively it has, it's created a model that would serve many liberal arts colleges very well. I look at the quality of the campus itself. You've got an atmosphere that's created by a number of buildings, some of them historic, that really promotes, I would think, a learning atmosphere that's second to none.
Yes.
So I look at Rollins and see a well-established institution that knows its way, mm-hmm. And is going to keep growing, if not in enrollment, in stature and potential for even greater service in the years ahead. Very proud to be your neighbor.
Thank you, John. And I think it speaks well of the opportunities in Central Florida that we have this variety. I mean, one of the strengths of the American system is that there are a lot of different ways to go to college. Yeah. And different ways are right for different kinds of students. And together here in Central Florida, we have something for everybody. Yeah.
You know, we got a family example of the point you just made. I have 3 cousins. Each of us was, in effect, a first-generation student. One went to the University of Texas at Austin, ended up getting a PhD in public administration, doing very well in life. His elder brother followed a wonderful pathway to great success. He married a really fine-looking young woman who was bright as could be and happened to be the daughter of a very wealthy man. That's a life plan that has worked across the centuries.
Well, I actually thought that's a good segue, because I actually thought maybe we should talk about life plans, because you yourself are a first-generation scholar.
Yes.
And I know that you didn't go to college thinking, when I grow up, I'm going to be the president of one of the largest, greatest university systems in the United States. So instead, think back, take us through your educational pathway. What were your thoughts as a college student, and what were your aspirations upon graduation, and how did it unfold?
Well, after sampling a few alternate pathways in college, some of which I could talk about tonight, but probably best that I not. I settled in on wanting to be a university professor. Mm-hmm. I had been really recruited effectively just by normal activities to the discipline of psychology, experimental psychology. And I admired greatly the major professor I had, and I decided I want to be like Bill. Mm-hmm. And he was a very good teacher. He did a lot of good research and spent a lot of time with students. And that was a model that I found very appealing. And that's how I started my career, as a matter of fact, is as an assistant professor of psychology.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, and I think that this is so true for so many of our students, what was it that lit the fire? What was it that gave you the notion? And it's mentors.
Yes.
I mean, really, the role of faculty can never be underestimated, because, yes, it's important that they be scholars and that they be able to convey knowledge for the next generation, but at the end of the day, it's that mentoring role that really changes students' lives, I think.
Absolutely. Someone has to show an interest. Someone has to seem to care.
Yes.
And someone has to maybe make a second effort or a third effort.
Indeed.
To really get a student on the right path. And it's all worth it.
It's all worth it. Well, John, I came here from Cleveland, Ohio most recently, but when you came to Florida, you came from Maine. I mean, I will notice those are both very cold, places this time of year, but I think we can agree it wasn't the weather that brought us here. But tell us about your choosing to come to UCF. What did you see here that captured your imagination? And what did you come imagining yourself being able to do here?
Well, my wife Martha and I are both native Houstonians. And if you know Houston, it's a boom or bust economy. Okay. With a lot of development going on all the time. Some of it successful, some not. But there's an atmosphere in an aggressively growing city that is appealing if you can handle it. And when we got here, I'd been here on one business trip, never got out to the campus, had no idea what it would be like. Ended up coming. My first step on the campus was as a candidate in the search for the next president, and I just had a sense of possibility. Mm-hmm. I couldn't have told you whether we would have 20,000 students or 50,000 or 15,000, but I knew there was an opportunity to build something really significant here. Just had that conviction, and told Martha in the evening as I was organizing my thoughts for the next day, got a call from her. And I said, I felt like I was coming home to a place that I'd not been. So it fit that well, and I had that sense of really strong possibility, but not a detailed idea of what it would be, what the main emphases would be. Just that it could be something great.
So it was really the region in Orlando and the fact that sort of on the model of Houston, you saw a center of activity that was going to grow. And boy, were you right. You were prescient, sir.
Well, one of the things that helped a great deal is I went over to what we know as the Research Park. It's the Central Florida Research Authority, I guess, that has the roughly 1,000-acre research park adjacent to our campus. So having that notion of growth, dynamic growth, strong possibility for developments of many kinds, and then seeing that research park there when I didn't know a whole lot about our curriculum, but I knew we had strong engineering.
Yeah.
And we had a large and good business college. We had been pioneers in computer science. So I'm sitting there thinking, having spent 4.5 years at the University of Maine, where you woke up in the morning and say, please God, would you give me an opportunity today to do something really significant? In Orlando, as I think we would all know, you wake up saying, Lord, will you help me choose between these wonderful opportunities? And, I certainly wouldn't claim to have any detailed knowledge of what we were going to be all about, but I knew we could do something significant.
That is very well put. That is, and I must say, that is what drew me to Rollins as well. Most of America's fine liberal arts colleges are in college towns, where the college is the town. Mm-hmm. And really, there's not much else to bring to the table. So as diversity becomes important, you have to import the diversity. Yes. As you want to have your students globally engaged, you have to take them out to engage the world. Here, in the middle of Orlando, it's all right here.
All right here.
It's all right here.
All right here.
Yeah, that's very well put. Well, let's talk a little bit about how students have changed. When you came to UCF, about 15% of students were from underrepresented groups. Mm-hmm. Now it's 46%. So your student body is almost half of your students bring additional diversity to your mission.
Yes.
Has that been a function of demographics or strategy or both? Could you talk about that?
Both, but I would have to say that if you look at those numbers, mm-hmm. the big change is in Hispanic students and faculty mm-hmm. and staff members. Mm-hmm. The big change. And you can plan all you like, but there's no way we could have attracted that many faculty members, staff members, students who are of Hispanic origin. So we were ready, I think, to provide good opportunities mm-hmm. to the students and the staff and the faculty. But really, you have to look for other factors as to why they all initially came. Not all, some I'm sure later on came because of UCF. But it's a kind of a tidal wave, a demographic shift that we've seen in Orlando over the last 15 or 20 years.
And do you feel that has changed what happens both in the classroom and outside the classroom?
In many ways, yes, mm-hmm. I do. Obviously, there are some things that we do as a university, and the we includes a lot of Hispanics, mm-hmm. a lot of other protected groups. But some of it's what we do, but a lot of it is just you get to a critical mass where people feel at home.
Yes.
You want a student body, you want a faculty, you want a staff that looks like the community you're in.
Yes.
And that's hard to achieve in many places. It's not so hard as it is in most right here in Orlando.
Yes, that is well said. Well, let's talk about your chosen discipline and whether you draw upon it. I chose to study philosophy and get my PhD in philosophy, and I find that I draw upon that every day in one way or another. You chose psychology, and you've stayed involved as a psychologist. How does that, what was that choice, and do you find yourself drawing upon your disciplinary background in your leadership?
To some extent, that's true. I've not been really active in psychology for some years now because the work that I was doing as I got into administration more, I really had to lean increasingly on my students, graduate students, and I was constantly in a stressful situation as to what effort got the real time. So I have not really been active as a psychologist for some time. However, if you've had even an intro psych course, you know that there are some really fundamental problems that are studied by experimental psychologists, such as how do you learn? How do you forget? Why do you forget? what really accounts for how you perceive objects, and not necessarily objects, but stimuli of a number of kinds. So it's a good discipline if you think about what it's telling you daily. You know, if you kind of think about the fact that it teaches you about individual differences, so that you know that it's unreasonable to expect that everyone will learn something at the same pace, unless it's almost trivial. So you get a lot of little reminders of things that ought to be important facts in your life as a laboratory psychologist.
That makes sense to me, and I also, I'm sure you think this too, but having been a practicing academic, I think is so important for leading an academic institution.
Yes.
Because you understand both the pressures and the joys of being a faculty member, of teaching, of research. You understand what it takes to prepare for classes each day, and I certainly continue to draw upon that experience for me.
That there's not, so far we really haven't found but one way to get that.
Yeah.
Just what you described.
Exactly. Well, by any measure, you've been a consummate and highly effective leader, and for many years, and to great good effect, and with tremendous accomplishments. For the guests here, and maybe some students in the audience, do you have any sort of insights into leadership that you would garner from your years, from your own observations or your experience?
Well, you know, there's some really elementary things that we ought to remind ourselves of. One that I would throw out for everyone is it's pretty clear that if you're going to be effective for any period of time as a leader, you have to tell the truth. People.
Can you say that again, please? Just a little louder.
Notice that I said long term.
Yeah.
You know, as Lincoln, I guess it was, said, you can fool some of the people some of the time,
Yeah.
some of the people all of the time, but not all of them. So I think that's a lesson a lot of people learn the hard way. There are a number of other things, but I don't want to have all the fun. Do you want to contribute on this one?
Well, you know, I've watched leaders who I admire, and I've tried to emulate their good qualities. And I've also watched leaders fail and learned from that too.
Yes.
And I guess, you know, my touchstone of leadership is grounded in the commitment to the mission.
Yes.
To ground decision-making in the core purpose, to constantly refer back to what are we trying to accomplish here?
Yeah. And how does that influence the choice you make
Exactly.
in resource allocation, in opportunity costs?
Exactly.
Yes.
And then in terms of leadership failure, because I think that paying attention there is important too, just as a lesson in humility. I think that the chief Achilles heel of a leader is arrogance or ego involvement, thinking that you're the smartest person in the room, rather than coming into a problem-solving situation prepared to listen and gather good ideas and organize them and help empower them, rather than being the one with the answer.
Yeah, there's another exercise that's helpful, I think. What was it? Peter Drucker, who had the great example of the crew who was tearing their way through a jungle, and the manager said, "Boy, we're making great progress here." The leader was up in a tree looking. He says, "We're headed in the wrong jungle." and you know, there is a task of leadership that is not management.
Yes.
But it
Especially when you have a university.
Yes, yes. Herding cats comes to mind.
Yeah.
But I do think it's helpful to remind ourselves that the thoughts we think, the words we speak when we are
Yes.
in the leader role are sometimes different than the manager role.
Yes.
Each is important, each is vital, but they're not the same.
You know, John, when you start out by talking about telling the truth and you end up recognizing with humility that there are some things you can't manage, it makes me think that the other key dimension of leadership that interests me is the human dimension, that leaders need to be kind and compassionate. And to do this work, you got to bring a sense of humor to work every day.
Sure
because the kinds of stuff that can wind up on your desk is, you have to see the humor in it.
Yes. And sometimes it's humor you can't share.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, the other side of, another side of leadership, especially in a university setting, is that to some extent, whatever we decide or whatever decision we shepherd forward, there's going to be criticism.
Sure.
And I don't know about you, but one of the things I notice about faculty is that they are highly trained critical thinkers. It's really what they do best. And I'm asking you for some advice now. How do you sort of continue to lead a university in a direction in the face of criticism?
Well, one thing you have to learn pretty early on in your tenure as a university president, at least, is you really better have a thick skin and some broad shoulders. You're going to get some criticism. Some of it, if you're fair and honest with yourself, is well directed.
Yes.
And you should learn from it and change what you're doing. Some of it is just a reflection of what you were pointing out, that faculty members and senior staffers are very well trained in criticism. And whatever you put out is going to draw some criticism. So you have to have, I would hark back to your comment on your reliance on the mission. Mm-hmm. If you know where you're trying to go, it's a lot easier than if you think there's something out there that you may bump into. That'll be good. And so if you will keep referencing the mission, I think you can have a much better chance of making the right choice. If you remind yourself that what you're really about is a high quality liberal arts education, or that what I'm really about in some of the roles that I play is in trying to produce engineers or computer scientists who will be at the cutting edge and will be important not just for Florida and Orlando, UCF, but for our country.
Right.
So that reliance on a true self-knowledge and a commitment to articulated values is very important, I think, in enabling you to function as a leader of an academic institution. And I would say, you mentioned earlier that you thought it was very important for a leader, a president, a leader, to have that deep knowledge of the academic enterprise. Mm-hmm. I share that belief. Sometimes people like to hear me say that, sometimes they don't. But I do think it's a very important point of observation.
Indeed. Well, let's continue on the theme of criticism just for a minute, but let's zoom out. We are occupying our positions in an era when higher education has come under under a lot of scrutiny and criticism. Yeah. It seems that our nation is sometimes, they're skeptical about cost and value. They doubt the long-term outcomes or the effectiveness of our educational programs. What is your analysis of this change of heart, and also what do you think we need to be doing more or less of to address it?
Well, I think part of what is going on here is that we have picked some poor models of success. I don't have anything against looking at the salary that our graduates make in their first job, but I'm more interested in what they're going to be making when they're in the middle years and they maybe move to a management position, and how well we've equipped them, not just to learn those things, but to be ready to learn and teach further points. So I think part of it is we've gone along a little too blithely and not realized that we need to do a better job of explaining the multiple ways that you can measure the value and success of higher education. You hear now increasingly people say, well, these kids don't need to go to college. You've heard it
Yes.
from friends and,
Yeah.
and donors, perhaps. I've had a lot of people tell me that somebody else's kids don't need to go to college, but I've
Exactly.
yet to have somebody say that their kids
Exactly.
don't need to go to college.
Well, and there's good reason for that, right? Because, I mean, I really think that I invite the call for proof of value,
Yes.
for proof of outcomes, for a proof of return on investment. But I think you're exactly right when you say, let's not reduce return to simply one salary the first year out.
Yeah.
Let's look at the return on investment over the course of a whole career.
You may be familiar with the old AT&T study. This, and when I say old, it's decades old. But they looked at salary progress of various groups, and their liberal arts graduates really did very well
Indeed.
in AT&T management, provided that they had taken math.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And,
Yep.
you know, if you didn't have the math, that's too bad. But if you did, a liberal arts education was a great enabler to a really good life.
Right. So let's turn and have a little fun now. UCF had an undefeated football season.
You notice, yeah. Go Knights.
So I want to say congratulations on being the national champions. And that is a lot of fun, and I have always enjoyed college athletics, but I wonder if you could just sort of share your views a little bit about the alignment of athletics and our mission, and what role does having robust athletic teams play in the overall mission and purpose of UCF?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to mention something that seldom gets mentioned these days, but is worth at least a little thought. And that is that for those students who are talented and gifted enough to really play at the Division I level, whether it's lacrosse or football or softball, there is a value, an educational value, in what those students learn as teammates.
Absolutely.
And so the task or the game itself has an educational value. And one of the things that's vexed me over the years is so many people are critical of Title IX and the requirement to spend as much on women's sports where there may not be a big audience, there may not be a paid gate. You don't really play the sports to make money.
No.
Well, by golly, if we think that the team sports are so good for our sons, why wouldn't we want them for our daughters?
Indeed.
It's a
Indeed.
really good question.
Yeah. Hear, hear.
Let me pose a question for you. If you think about two really good universities in Atlanta, Emory and Georgia Tech, and you think about the sort of Joe Sixpack followers who really get all fired up about college athletics. You've got two, I would say, equally eminent institutions.
Indeed.
But if you ask that guy on the street or the gal on the street, what do you know about fill in the blank? Guess who gets the best recognition?
Well, I would think Georgia Tech.
You know, I'm sure it's true.
Yeah.
And people who've lived in Atlanta will have confirmed that for me, so I'm not just shooting something out there. But I think if you're a large state university in the southeast, certainly, and I would say a good bit of the southwest, there are several things you do. You award a number of PhDs, you get a fair number of research grants, and you play 1A football. And you know, I would be quick to say I didn't make that rule or those
Yes.
rules, but I do understand that if you're the
Yes.
president of a state university of any size, you better play football and you better play it fairly well.
Yes. No, I get that. I do see that too. The large state systems are total institutions in a sense.
Yes.
And having all of those facets are what make them attractive and give them standing.
It is troubling, though, that we see so much of what can only be described as corruption these days in sport, not just college, but certainly including college. And I think we as presidents have to be ready to take our share of the load in trying to regulate and inculcate a system of values that makes cheating not an option.
Indeed. Indeed. Hear, hear. In the introduction, Sam talked about your belief in partnerships, and that partnerships has been one of the things that has really fueled not just the growth of UCF, but the integration of UCF into the whole Central Florida economy. Could you just give us some concrete examples of some partnerships that you're proud of and that you think have really worked to advance UCF?
Sure. I see our medical dean, Deb German, sitting in the audience. I would say, Deb, you really weren't here when it started, but when we started the attempt to get a medical school, people thought we were crazy. And some laughed out loud when we made the proposition to them that they ought to help us do it. We could not have gotten to the point where we would hire Deb as our medical dean, because we didn't have a med school for a good while. What we did is form a partnership with Florida International University, and I hope I don't offend anybody with this tale of how things sometimes work in a state system. Mitch Medique was then the president down at FIU, and both of us wanted to go and get a medical school.
Okay.
And there was an argument about who would go first. And we finally said, that's the wrong question. Why don't we ask how we get there? And my formulation was that if you had Mitch go first, or if I went first, the argument would be made that medical schools cost a lot. We already had several. We didn't need another and couldn't afford it if we did. So whether the Miami proposal went forward or the Orlando proposal went forward, it would be shot down. And Mitch thought about it a while and said, you're probably right. So we made a pact that we would work together. And I could sum up what happened is that while the argument was made that the state couldn't afford another medical college, in the end they decided that while they couldn't afford one, they could afford two. And Miami and Orlando got medical schools. Now, a lot of people don't like that because there was no real plan that said one or two. We each had a plan that said we want a medical school. We both got them. They've been successful. And I feel really good about the outcome. I don't particularly like the method.
Yes.
But I like the outcome. And I don't think there was another way to get to the method, to the result other than that method. That would be one example. I'll give you another one that's a lot closer to me. The first partnership we did after I got to UCF was brought to me by Dan Holzenbeck. I don't think Dan's with us this evening, but he's our VP for university relations, and he's the best lobbyist in the state university system. And he came to me and said, our previously acting president, Bob Bryan, whom some of you may have known, had turned down a request for Dan to promote a fire station on a parcel of land out off McCullough Road, right at the back of our campus. It was a little parcel. We couldn't do anything with it, really. And there was a partnership fire station built there, Seminole and Orange County. I forget how many, it was tens of millions they saved over a 20-year period by not having to build but one,
right.
Equipping, staffing. Well, in 66, I guess it was, I was biking over in that research park I mentioned earlier and had a heart attack. And got back over to the edge of the campus, called my wife and called 911. The EMTs got to me so fast that I had almost no detectable damage to my heart, but I would have died if they hadn't gotten me going again. that was the fire station that
Yes.
Bob didn't want to build. And so I think that was a damn successful partnership.
Good for you. That's very good.
But there are so many others that we could mention. Some of them very specific, some of them more general. But I think it's fair to say that at the time that we came, or that I came to UCF, the university was an afterthought in economic development activities. And I would say today that it would probably not be true that no real economic development takes place without UCF's participation. But a high percentage of the development does include the university. And it's because it's been discovered that we're a useful partner.
Absolutely.
And,
well, and this is a knowledge economy, and you produce that informed workforce.
Yeah. Our Florida High-Tech Corridor has produced hundreds, thousands of jobs, and the annual state appropriation is a pittance, but you match state money with private money on a project that private industry really wants to see go somewhere.
Right.
And you solve a lot of problems.
Indeed. Well, John, you've received many deserved honors and awards, consistently named Most Powerful People by Orlando Magazine and Most Powerful People in Central Florida by the Orlando Sentinel. You've had Legacy and Lifetime Achievement Awards, all well-deserved. Are there any recognitions that really stand out for you as especially meaningful or personal?
Well, there are a number. I think I would just give you two as examples. One is the James B. Green Award, which I won, I think, back in about 2002. And it's given for someone who's been actively involved with the Economic Development Commission in promoting economic development in Central Florida. That came to me at a time when I really appreciated the affirmation. And it had been won by a number of people in previous years, a number of people for whom I had great respect.
Yeah.
And that, in that sense, I think that's a great way that awards like that can work. The other one I would mention is really brand new. Rick, it was about a week or two ago, we had the Black faculty and staff breakfast, mentoring breakfast, and they gave me an award that recognized what I've done to promote diversiveness and inclusivity over the 26 years.
Congratulations.
It meant a lot.
I would be very proud of that myself. Good for you. Well, you've decided to step out of the presidency now, and I think the audience and I, too, would like to know sort of what prompted the decision, why now, and sort of what's next. What are you going to do? What do you have in sight?
Well, the decision was prompted because I realized that in the natural course of things, we have some change in our administrative team. And we had a near loss when our great provost, Dale Whitaker, was, I think, the real choice to be the next president up at Iowa State. Now, he decided to stay with us, but I had to think about what it would be like to try to recruit a good replacement for such a key guy, knowing that the last question you get in the job interview with that person you hope to recruit is, how much longer are you going to be around?
Indeed.
And my honest answer would have been another year or two, and I just didn't see how I could, with a straight face, say we were going to recruit the kind of person we want and need when I couldn't give a better assurance than that. So at that point, I decided that it was time to talk to our chairman, Marcos Marchena, and get another path started. So it is tough to give up a job I've loved as much as this, but it is time for me to do it for so many reasons.
And what's next?
I'm going to try to remember what it's like not to set an alarm.
Well, there's no shortage of alarms that go off on a college campus. I know that.
Well, I'll be working for about quarter time for UCF in the next year or so, trying to raise some money for faculty causes and student tuition and other causes. We're in the last stage of a capital campaign, so if I can be helpful there, that'll be a great satisfaction to me. And we'll see what develops from there. But we're moving up to Wisconsin to a home we have bought up there. Our son and daughter both live in the Madison area. Our daughter will live in the house that we bought with us. And we've got one grandson, a son and daughter-in-law right there in the Madison area. So it's a very congenial spot for us. And yes, I do know how cold it gets up
Yeah.
there.
You're choosing winter.
Yes, yes. But you know, what I console myself with is that all of the bad memories I had about the ice on a windshield and all of that had to do with when I was leaving the campus and going to a meeting somewhere during the day.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm told by some friends that when you're retired, you really don't have to be anywhere. So I don't know. I doubt that's truly the case, but
Yeah.
we're going to give it a try.
Good for you. So as you think about your successor, what do you see as the real challenges and opportunities for your successor for UCF? As you think about the next decade of this great university, what's just on the horizon that they're probably going to have to attend to?
Well, we've got an ongoing shortage of funding in the whole state system.
Yes.
But it's especially acute in the larger urban institutions where we now educate. If you just think of UCF, USF, FIU, we educate half the students in the whole university system. I'll promise you we don't get half the budget. That will be a problem that our board and the administrative team will really have to work hard on. And you know, it's not like somebody woke up some morning and said, how do we ruin things for the urban universities? It's just that some of the models that are time honored don't fit an urban research university very well in the 21st century. I've sometimes only partly in jest said that some of the people that we work with in higher education are hard at work trying to build the great university of the 19th century. And you know, we just don't live in a world where that's a viable alternative.
Very interesting. Well, Sam, I know that some members of our audience submitted some questions that they would like to hear John address, and so maybe you could come up and share from them some of them. And I hope that you edited out all the really hard ones.
Well, we had a lot of great questions, and they should all feel very intellectual because a lot of the questions that they asked, you asked. So I mean, I feel like that's pretty impressive stuff. A couple that maybe didn't quite get touched upon that perhaps both of you might even share some commentary. But Dr. Hitt, what's your best advice for young professionals hoping to rise into executive level positions in the Central Florida community?
Do the job you've got today really well. That's where you start. So many folks think they can take a shortcut, and because they are bright and they're well prepared, they don't really have to work all that hard. They've got a UCF or a Rollins degree. Their future is assured. No, it's not. You've got to learn how to bloom where you're planted, and that's pretty good advice, whatever you're doing.
I'm going to go with that wisdom. Absolutely. You know, and in fact, but I'll tell just a little story. And I love this about our students. I love this generation of college students right now. I have a tremendous amount of optimism for what they're going to bring when they get the reins. But I have not one but two students that have approached me and said, President Cornwell, would you mentor me because I really want to grow up and be a college president? And what I've said to them is, well, you don't start there.
Yeah.
I've said, you know, really, if you want to be a college president, to your point, you have to do each thing along the way with all of the passion that you can bring to it for its own sake.
Yeah.
Not instrumentally, but because you so believe in that.
Yeah.
And that I don't think anybody can chart a path to a college presidency.
I would agree with that. I do think it's important, though, that people work very hard at what they're doing. Doesn't mean they don't look around to see,
Yeah.
you know, simple questions like, what the heck does a president really do?
Yes, yes.
When I was coming out of college, I had no idea what a university president really did.
Yes.
I learned a little more about that as I got my doctoral degree and had to deal with grants and contracts and so forth. I think if I'm honest about it, when I went off to college, I really didn't know what college was all about. You know, as far as I was concerned, it could have been grades 13, 14, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I confess some days I still don't know what a college president does, but for the most part, but what we have done is we've set up a mentoring program for these students where they're shadowing each division, you know, development, admissions, business, grounds, so that they can kind of understand what how a university is structured, and that kind of mentoring I think will be good
sort
for them.
Sort of a Rollins grown program, kind of like the AC Fellow program.
Exactly. Yeah.
Dr. Hitt, how has philanthropy and the donors of Central Florida changed over the past 25 years?
I think we've seen a changing of the guard in major philanthropy, at least as I experience it. And institutions that aren't constantly working to add to and replenish their donor pools are probably having a hard time and probably will. I don't know what your take on that is. A newcomer, relative newcomer would be, Grant.
Well, I think, I mean, I've been a college president 11 years, and have I seen a change in donor behavior or donor expectations? I would say yes. And I think increasingly donors want to be engaged in the project that they're supporting.
Yes.
They want to feel a personal connection to it rather than just sort of making a gift and trusting that you'll do good work with it.
Yeah, they're more investors than donors.
They're more investors than donors. That's very well put. Yeah.
Sort of two short and simple ones, perhaps, maybe not, but what part of your role was your least favorite?
I don't guess I ought to say board meetings. And it wouldn't be true if I did, but I couldn't resist that. It's good to be a short-timer. You know, I don't really know the least. I don't enjoy having to deal with folks who are stubbornly committed to facts that aren't facts. And every now and then, as a university president, somebody can start bending your ear, and there seems to be no end to it. And they will never understand that what they're saying makes no sense. So I don't like that.
Good answer.
Fortunately, I don't have to do a lot of it, but I don't like it at all.
And, you know, I don't know if you can summarize it into one thing, but can you define what you're most proud of? What sort of your greatest accomplishment that during your tenure?
Directed toward me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Well, I think the conventional answer and the true answer would be the approval for the medical college, and then working with Deb German in building a college that has been, by all measures, a tremendous success. And just wanting that so badly for the city, for the university, getting the approval on a 15-to-1 vote, then where people had said we had no chance at all, and then working with Deb when we hired her and brought her on board to build a first-rate medical college. We didn't set out to build a second-rate medical college. No plan for failure. And that's been very gratifying, I must say. Worked with so many great people in making that come true.
Well, that's the questions. They were excellent, and if I can close, gentlemen, President Cornwell, thank you for leading such a great and interesting and inspiring conversation. President Hitt, on behalf of the Rollins community, thanks. Thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for all you've done for higher education in Central Florida and for all you've done for our great region and state. The future of UCF and our region is stronger because of your leadership. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thanks for being with us tonight. Rollins is proud to be a partner with UCF in higher education and in positioning our region as truly one of the finest in the country, if not the world. invite you back to Rollins anytime to enjoy a theater event at our historic Annie Russell Theater, see a Winter Park Institute event, visit the Cornell Fine Arts Museum, watch a game at Rollins College, and we hope that you have a wonderful and safe evening and journey on your way back home. Thanks and good night.
Thank you.
Thank all of you.